Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today, must start and must sit wide receivers for week 3 of the fantasy football season. I'll be running through each and every matchup, letting you know which receivers you should start and which receivers you should sit. We'll go all the way from Thursday to our doubleheader on Monday. Guys, if this content is valuable to you and you enjoy the video, would really appreciate if you did hit that like button. Would mean a lot if you also hit the subscribe button if you are new here. Again, every single matchup starting on Thursday night. Today's video brought to you by the Stunt. I've got a short video to show you guys what they're all about. Social media is such a crowded space these days. If you're looking for sports content on the latest news, advice, or hell, even entertainment, it can be cluttered by content you don't actually want to see. That's where the Stunt comes in. They've taken all the elements of your favorite social media apps, brought it to one place, and made it about the one thing we love most: sports. Stunt was founded by the creator of YouTube TV at Google, so the design is eye-popping and the navigation is simple. Check out the latest takes, sparks, and live rooms from us and other content creators like Trey Wingo and Michael Irvin. Don't just follow sports. Be a part of the conversation. Download the Stunt app today. We'll be live on the Stunt on Friday from 4 Eastern to 5 Eastern, answering all of your start-sit questions because the injuries and some of the news reports that are coming out of practice this week and things that lead up to Sunday. A lot of things can change here. I'll try to stay on top of it here on Wednesday when I am recording this. There is some stuff that I can get to you, but if anything changes, I can have updated information to you guys on what players to start and sit, and as well answer your specific questions of, hey, should I play this guy over this guy over this guy? What should I do here with these injuries? I will answer those on the Stunt, 4 to 5 Eastern. We'll be live in the live room there. So go download the Stunt. The link is down below to download the app in the description as well in the pinned comments. Would love to talk to you guys there. So definitely join us 4 Eastern on Friday. Let's get into these matchups. We're starting with Giants 49ers on Thursday night. I've got, as you guys will see on your screen, I've got coverage grades, pass rush grades, fantasy points allowed, and an EPA against the pass for each of these teams to help us when we decide what to do, start or sit. Now it is week 2, so that doesn't necessarily mean that this information you have from these stats are going to tell you the entire story because we don't have a lot of data here, but still something to look at in your considerations, maybe a tiebreaker for some of these guys. Let's start with the Giants. That's the team that there is a lot to deliberate here. Honestly, with Saquon Barkley likely to miss, he didn't practice today, I do think that these receivers are potentially valuable to you, especially in your deeper leagues. Like if Darius Slayton is on the wire, he led the team in routes run. When he's on the field and available, he's been a pretty consistent target, like good floor type of player. And the Niners are an elite run defense. That makes them a team that, although they look very good here in coverage grade, pass rush grade, EPA against the pass, 16th in fantasy points allowed. So it's not that scary of a matchup because the volume should be there. Because with Matt Breida, this team won't run the ball all that efficiently. So Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton are definitely interesting starts. I'm very excited about Darren Waller's potential performance in this game. Don't be too scared. I know the names aren't great, but the opportunity is there. On the 49ers side, Brandon Ayuk is going to be a game-time decision on Thursday. If he is out, this is a very plus matchup for their running game. The Giants have been brutal against the run to start the year. This could be a game where they're going to run the football a ton. A guy like Elijah Mitchell could get involved, but to build that lead, Deebo Samuel will definitely be involved a little bit as a runner, definitely so as a receiver. So if Brandon Ayuk is out, I feel really confident in Samuel. But honestly, if both of these guys are available, if Ayuk is able to play, Ayuk could be a guy you start. But honestly, I would maybe lean more towards sitting him because if he's banged up in a game where they're a massive favorite, as long as they handle business early on, they don't really need to play him all that much. And you could see that volume not be quite the same. And we all know the competition that there is between all these guys receiving wise. So those are my thoughts on Thursday night. Moving into the 1 o'clock slate, Chargers, Vikings. We've got a Chargers team that has been brutal against the pass to start the year. Dead last in fantasy points allowed, as you guys can see, second to last in passing EPA. Their coverage has been brutal. Their pass rush has been fine, but the Vikings are a passing offense that can move the ball through the air at will and create some explosive plays. Honestly, makes Jordan Addison one of those must-start guys for me. If the Chargers have not figured this thing out, and I don't know why I would expect that to change, because it's not like they're dealing with injuries. This is a healthy defense that can't seem to stop the pass. So when it comes to Jordan Addison, as a guy to consider, he's a guy I would be starting over a guy like, let's say, Brandon Ayuk, who you're dealing with on Thursday night, who you have to make a decision on before Thursday. I would look to play a guy like Jordan Addison over him, even if Ayuk does play, despite the good matchup against the Giants. On the Chargers side of things, the Vikings, they're no different than the Chargers. But right now, their pass rush hasn't been great either, even, with some of the departures with Dalvin Tomlinson and Zadarius Smith with the Browns now. They have a guy like Danielle Hunter, but they don't have a lot of other options. And I do think the Chargers will be just fine moving the ball through the air. The Vikings, 22nd in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 20th in passing EPA. Look, this Vikings team, I don't think is making a lot of stops through the air. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, two guys you absolutely want to fire up in this matchup. Bills, Commanders. The Bills and Commanders is a matchup where I do think both of these teams will be throwing the football a fair bit. So on the Bills side of things, offensively, the Commanders have been brutal in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 27th, so bottom 5 there. But they have been pretty decent. Pass rush, obviously, we know about being good with those 4 guys up front, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, De'Aaron Payne, Jonathan Allen. Because from an EPA perspective, you can see their top 10. Pass rush has been great. But I do think the Bills will struggle to run the football because I really like the Commanders' run front with those front guys we talked about in the front 4. So I think Gabe Davis is a guy you can play in this matchup. That's really the one you're deliberating on. I do like it for him because I do think the Bills will need to throw the football, and whether or not they build up this lead and win this game in big fashion will be done through their passing offense. So despite the matchup where you could see them run the football more, I don't think that's a problem for Davis. Could create some more explosive plays and have another good week like he did last week. On the Commanders' side, the Bills are a team that have been very good so far. Pass rush hasn't been there, but top 6 in EPA, 8th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. It's been a pretty consistent group, and when they're healthy, they're a very talented group. But for the Commanders, they're a sizable dog in this game, almost a full touchdown at home in Washington. And I don't think they'll run the ball all that efficiently in this particular matchup. So I do think this is a game where they'll lean on Sam Howell's arm, and it makes Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin two guys I do like in this matchup. Dotson's been moving around in the offense. He leads the team in targets. He just hasn't put together that big game quite yet. And if Logan Thomas is out, that'll definitely help Dotson see some more volume. McLaurin's a guy that can create some big plays when the team will probably need it in this game trailing. You could see them chase some plays downfield, and McLaurin has been a great guy for that for the team. So both of those guys are players I'm confident starting this week. Next, we have Saints-Packers, a battle between two NFC teams that I do think will struggle to score points against the opposing defenses. They're both pretty solid, both top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. The Packers saw Christian Watson practice on Wednesday. Maybe he plays. Like, if he does play, I definitely want to start him because I know his talent and his ability to create yards after the catch and score touchdowns like we saw last year. But if he doesn't play, I really am still not ready to take any shots on these wide receivers. Like, Luke Musgrave would be the guy I'd be willing to take the chance on the most because he plays the tight end position and because he's been running the most routes. Jaden Reed was the guy scoring the touchdowns last week. He got on the field a good amount. Being that slot guy, could see him be a bit more of a safety valve for Jordan Love. I have confidence in Love. I think Love looked great the last couple of weeks to start the season. Romeo Doubs isn't really being that target hog he had the opportunity to be. So I think there's just too much being shared around, and the Saints boast a really good defense here, third in EPA against the pass. With that secondary, I do think it'll be tough sledding. So I'm going to lean towards sitting most of these guys. But if Christian Watson plays, I think you can start him in this matchup just because of his talent level being so different compared to these other receiving options. On the Saints side of things, Packers have been great in pass against the pass. We're looking at them as a middle-of-the-road unit in EPA, but a good pass rush, good coverage grade. Everything here that's highlighted in green will be a top 10 unit. Everything that's in that yellow will be guys that are in the middle. We're either looking at top 10 or bottom 10. So the Packers have been good. The Saints, Michael Thomas has been sticking out to me as a guy that looks more like the number one option for this team, but Derek Carr has such an affinity for the deep ball, and Olave fits that profile so well. So I do still want to go to Olave here, despite the talented secondary for the Packers. And for Michael Thomas, I think he's more of like a middle-of-the-road type of play, wide receiver 3 type of play this week. I'm not as confident against this Packers team. I do think this game will be low scoring. Saints go on the road here. Thomas is a guy that I lean more to sitting in this matchup, even though I do see the team he seems more like that target hog, but he is a guy that I find I'm getting that production from only if he scores touchdowns. Like otherwise, he's going to give me four or five receptions and maybe 50 yards, where Olave can give me those explosive plays. So in this particular matchup, I'm leaning more towards sitting Thomas. Falcons, Lions. The Falcons have really stepped things up defensively, both against the run and the pass. And for the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown did not practice on Wednesday. If Amon-Ra St. Brown is out, that makes Josh Reynolds a really solid start for you. Reynolds has been the guy on the field consistently. He's not leaving the field much. You know, you're seeing Marvin Jones and Khalif Raymond battle for that third spot. Reynolds has cemented himself as the number 2 guy in this offense. And if we don't see Amon-Ra St. Brown, Reynolds is the number 1. This is still a well-schemed offense that even with a lack of talent, because I don't think Josh Reynolds is an incredibly talented player, can scheme him open and create plays for him. So I would be pretty confident playing him. If Amon-Ra St. Brown does play, the Falcons right now are top 10 in EPA against the pass and top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So it's technically not a great matchup as things look right now, but Reynolds has been a pretty consistent 2 for this team, and now we're looking at the potential of David Montgomery missing, so maybe they lean a little bit more in the pass game. So in my mind, that puts Reynolds, as opposed to where I'd probably have him as like a wide receiver 5, he's more that wide receiver floor, decent flex play for you because of those consistent opportunities. Because I don't believe the Falcons are quite as good as the numbers indicate. The Panthers and the Packers passing games, Packers without Christian Watson, aren't, all that impressive of performances against the pass. So Reynolds would be an okay play for me. On the flip side here with the Falcons passing offense, I don't have a lot of faith in Desmond Ridder, and I don't have a lot of trust in what he's been able to do for this team in the passing game. Bijan Robinson, the run game has been much more of a reliant piece of this team offensively, and the Lions have been great against the run, but they also haven't been all that great against the pass here. Their coverage grade of 58.8. The pass rush, surprisingly, hasn't quite been there. I still think it's been pretty solid. 21st in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So Drake London is a guy I'm still putting my faith in because he's still been proven to be a little bit more of that red zone option. He's gotten that consistent volume. Pitts is getting more downfield looks that make it a little bit tougher for him to be consistent. London is more that intermediate guy, seems to be the number 1 target here. So I can play him in this matchup because of the Lions defense that still doesn't look to be completely there in the against the pass either. Titans, Browns. I want to start actually with the Browns here because I do see this as an opportunity. I shouldn't say opportunity, as an unfortunate situation where the Browns will need to lean on Deshaun Watson quite a bit here. The Titans are 30th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 25th in passing EPA. Teams cannot run the football against this Titans run front and this front 4 they have, so they have to lean on the pass. And Nick Chubb is gone, so I can't be saying, the Browns are so good running the football, it doesn't really matter who the opponent is. Now Jerome Ford is, the guy in the backfield. Kareem Hunt's the guy in the backfield. I don't think they can do it anywhere near as well. So to me, Elijah Moore, who's been a guy consistently getting targets but missing the production so far, is someone I can start this week a little bit more confidence. A guy like Amari Cooper, who we saw play through the injury, he was serviceable for you. I think you can start both of these guys in this matchup because the passing volume has to be high for this team if they want to compete and be efficient offensively, despite Deshaun Watson's immense struggles. I've been looking at the numbers. He's had some of the most time to throw in the league so far through the first 2 weeks and still has not found production. This is a week where he might find less time to throw. So this team really needs to scheme up some opportunities to find efficient passing situations. And I think getting Elijah Moore the ball in short areas of the field is definitely going to help them. So I do feel good about playing Elijah Moore here despite his struggles so far. On the Titans side, the Browns have been very good across the board defensively. Very good unit. DeAndre Hopkins had a pretty down game against the Chargers. Wasn't sure if he was going to play. We saw Treylon Burks create some big plays. Chig Okonkwo create some big plays. What can you do with this team, this passing offense, in this particular matchup? I will go back to DeAndre Hopkins, finding that he probably is a little bit healthier here. I still see him as the dominant number 1 option for this team. He has an over 30% target rate. He is getting the ball quite a bit still. And with the Browns and how good they've been against the pass and the run so far, 2nd in EPA, 5th in fantasy points allowed, I'm going to stay away from those secondary options here. I do think Derrick Henry will still be a focal point for this team on the ground. So in a competitive matchup here, two teams that haven't put up a ton of points so far to start the year, because the Titans did a little bit against the Chargers, I would lean more towards sitting those secondary options for the Titans. Moving to Texans, Jaguars. The Texans have consistently been dating back to last season, been a team that you can't score a lot of fantasy points against because for the most part, you've been able to kind of dominate against them. But we have an opportunity here for both Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley, where it looks like Zay Jones might not play. He's got a knee injury, didn't practice on Wednesday. That's going to open the door for those opportunities for Kirk and Ridley. And I do think that this team, although they're a sizable favorite in this game, I have seen so far them lean on the pass quite a bit in Trevor Lawrence's arm. So I feel pretty good about playing both of these guys because the Texans haven't been good against the pass. They're 22nd in EPA against the pass, so not great. Again, 4th in fantasy points allowed to receivers. That doesn't scare me quite yet off of this. Ridley and Kirk are guys I want to play if Zay Jones is out. If Jones is in, I'm a little bit more worried about Kirk. I know he came off a massive game against the Chiefs, but I'm not completely sold that this will continue to be we'll continue to see this significant of a target share for Kirk. So that's my only concern. But if Jones doesn't play, which I don't think he will, these are two guys I think you can still play despite a matchup that could lean itself more to the Jags putting the ball on the ground. On the Texans side, Jags have been pretty good defensively. Coverage grade of 82.3 is one of the best in the NFL. But in terms of fantasy points allowed to receivers, right in the middle of the league, 17th. The Texans are in another spot here where CJ Stroud might have to throw the ball 35 to 40 times. So that's going to lend itself to guys like Nico Collins, guys like Robert Woods, guys like Tank Dell. I'm not quite ready to dive in on Tank Dell, even though we talked about adding him off the wire and his route participation was fantastic. What I am ready to consistently start to play is Nico Collins. Collins hasn't changed. Nothing's really changed for Collins week to week. He's on the field a ton. He's receiving 10 plus targets, I believe now in back-to-back weeks. So I'm reliably going to him. It'll just be, can you take the dive on Tank Dell quite yet? This early in the season, I'm not ready to do so, but feel very confident about Nico Collins and a guy like Robert Woods coming off the field a little bit and Tank Dell's uncertainty. I'm not going to go to those two guys despite the matchup. Collins, though, a guy I can play confidently. Next up, Patriots, Jets. A Jets offense that's really hard to rely on on the passing game. Garrett Wilson is still not a guy I'm looking to sit. He's still the target hog in this offense and is still, with his talent, able to create some plays to be serviceable for you. On the Patriots side of things, there is no chance I'm starting a single Patriots receiver in this matchup. I know the Jets haven't particularly been good against the pass. Technically, the numbers say 23rd in EPA, 11th in fantasy points allowed to receivers. Still a good unit in my mind. We know the talent there. Devontae Parker got into the mix, and it really started to muddy the waters between him and Kendrick Bourne. So nothing here other than Hunter Henry now looking to be a weekly start. Otherwise, nothing to consider here in the receiving game for the Patriots. Broncos, Dolphins. Broncos offensively, I do see this Dolphins team really looking a ton better against the pass, second in fantasy points allowed to receivers. I think this is a full sale sit of all of these guys. I know you spent some decent draft capital on Jerry Jeudy. You're waiting for him to come back. The target volume wasn't really there in week one, and the Dolphins are a team that have been very good against the pass. I know this is one where the Broncos could likely be trailing in this game, leading to some more passing volume. I'm just not completely there yet on what we're seeing from this team in the passing offense. So I'm a little worried about playing any of these guys because I do think Cortland Sutton is looking like a reliable target, and now we have this bit more of a share between Jeudy and Sutton. We've got a down matchup. We've got an offense that doesn't quite look good yet. I'm not willing to take the chance and dive in here because I do think under Vic Fangio, the Dolphins boast a really good unit against the pass. On the other side of things, the Dolphins, the week in and week out, I really don't have to talk about this team too much. You're never going to sit Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill regardless of the matchup. And the Broncos actually have fallen back a little bit in their coverage, 29th in EPA, 19th in fantasy points allowed. This was once an elite unit against the pass last season. It hasn't been so far against two teams that I didn't expect to give them a lot of trouble in the Commanders and Raiders. So nothing to talk about here when it comes to your Dolphins receivers. Colts, Ravens. These are two defenses I find to be very similar. Ones you don't want to run on, but ones you can move the ball through the air on. That lends itself to the fantasy points allowed to receivers for both of these teams. 31st for the Colts, 23rd for the Ravens. The Colts offense, let's start with Alec Pierce and Josh Downs could eventually, I could see them being guys you want to add off the waiver wire off of this matchup. Doesn't mean I necessarily am going to take the chance to find out who to play. Pierce is on the field the most, but Downs is getting more target share. Could be really interesting if you're in like a 16-man league. These could be guys you could take a flyer on. And as well, if you're playing DFS, I think those are two guys to consider. I would lean more towards Downs. But this just means Michael Pittman is a must start in this matchup. Volume's been great for him. I know we're potentially going to see Gardner Minshew at quarterback. That's probably going to lead to more passing volume because Minshew's legs aren't a factor. So for a guy like Michael Pittman, I'm still confident starting with the backup QB because I think Minshew's still he's probably the most capable backup in the league. The Ravens side of things, Zay Flowers is going to be an absolute start here. The Colts, like I mentioned, 31st in fantasy points allowed to receivers. The question will be, is Odell Beckham available to play? And if he is, the target volume and his opportunity and how he looked last week, really solid. So if he is playing, good matchup here. The Ravens have these, Justice Hill, Gus Edwards backfield that isn't too talented. I could see them moving the football through the air pretty well in this matchup. So the Colts 56 coverage grade, a bottom 10 in the league as well. There's not a lot of talent in the secondary, but you don't want to run against a pretty good front seven. Lends itself to some good passing or receiving performances. Rashad Bateman isn't there yet. Maybe if Odell Beckham misses, you could potentially get him into your lineup because I do still think he's a talented player and they will need to move the ball through the air. But right now, with the way things look, Odell should be fine. The team has said that so far through this week. Panthers at the Seahawks. We saw the Panthers passing offense really, really struggle last week. But it could be a matchup that they might like here to be able to move the ball through the air. Seattle. We've got them all in the bottom part of the league in all of these categories: coverage grade, pass rush, fantasy points allowed. They're 29th, pass EPA 30th. So could be beneficial here to be able to move the football through the air. The Seahawks pass rush has not been good so far. That could really help Bryce Young out. Adam Thielen hyper-targeted. Jonathan Mingo targeted quite a bit and was on the field the most of all these receivers. I'm not ready to dive in on Mingo quite yet, but I do think the team really likes him. Thielen, though, a guy that if you're in a full point per reception league, do you think could be a pretty decent play, could give you an easy 12, 13 points in this matchup. The Seahawks haven't been great against pass or run, but I do think the Seahawks are a team that will handle business against this Panthers team. So that'll put the Panthers in a game script where they will need to rely on Bryce Young's arm here to make some plays. On the Seahawks side of things, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, still a massive competition here between these three options. The Panthers are pretty good against the pass, actually, 3rd in fantasy points allowed, 11th in rushing or passing EPA. I said it last week, but DK got hurt and left, and that allowed some opportunity for Lockett to produce. I think for the time being, I'm going to be rolling with DK. Well, I'm going to consistently roll with DK because he is that end zone option. I trust him week in and week out. When it comes to Lockett, that competition with JSN, for the time being, let's roll with Lockett. Lockett is continues to just kind of prove doubters wrong and be able to stay on the field, produce, demand target share, and even score some touchdowns. So this is a matchup that I'm not too scared of. I'm not too high on Lockett. I still see him as like a wide receiver, back-end wide receiver 3, 4 in this particular matchup because I do think the Seahawks will find some success on the ground here. I like Kenneth Walker quite a bit in this matchup. So I do like DK. JSN is someone I'm just still keeping on my bench and stashing, but Lockett now comes more into the conversation as a guy to start. Cowboys, Cardinals. The Cowboys have been absolutely dominating through the first 2 weeks. Brandon Cooks practicing. They are saying it looks like he will play, so that will enter the fold here for this Cowboys passing offense. How much will they need to pass in this game? I think receiver-wise, I'm not going to take the chance on playing Brandon Cooks. I know, a lot of talk about how good are the Cardinals defensively. They're not very talented. Despite that, the Cowboys will probably handle this game pretty easily and early. Their defense will definitely do a huge job for them. So they don't need to lean on or too much on the pass in this game. I could see them running the ball quite a bit. That's going to take away that volume for Cooks as the secondary guy. CeeDee Lamb is, of course, still someone to absolutely start here against this Cardinals team. On the Cardinals side of things, though, run into a matchup against the Cowboys first in fantasy points allowed to receivers, 1st in EPA. I think they have the number 1 coverage grade, might have the number 1 pass rush grade too. Zach Ertz is the guy always on the field, the tight end spot that despite a bad matchup, you can still go to. The other receivers, Rondell Moore, Marquise Brown, who am I forgetting? Michael Wilson. None of these guys are guys I feel confident in one of the worst matchups you could possibly have. So all these guys are definitely sits for me this week. Closing out the 4 p.m. slate, Bears at the Chiefs. The Chiefs here. We're cycling through a lot of different receivers. You saw a couple big plays from Sky Moore. You saw Kadarius Toney, he's barely on the field, but he gets on the field for 14, 15 plays, and he gets 5 targets. It's crazy his target rate when he's actually out there. But the thing is with Tony is he wasn't practicing on Wednesday, so that could be a concern. That's going to open up opportunities for these other receivers in this offense. Your question is Sky Moore someone you can reliably play? Well, the Bears defense would tell you could because they're 26th in fantasy points allowed, dead last in pass EPA. The Chiefs are a pretty sizable favorite here. I would lean more towards this team not having a reliable option here in the receiving game because I think the passing volume will be down as a sizable favorite. I don't want to take the chance on a guy like Sky Moore who still didn't see good enough volume, just hit a couple explosives. He's not running as many routes as Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I don't know what the status will be of Kadarius Toney. If he is in, that'll muddy the waters even further in this receiving game. And another week for Travis Kelce to heal up because he didn't quite look like himself last week is another opportunity to take away those from Moore. On the Bears side of things, this is a matchup where they're a massive favorite. Justin Fields has laid out some just absurd comments blaming his coaching staff while the internet is trolling him for the fact that he can't read a defense and we're seeing all these wide open receivers he can't throw the ball to. He's talking about, I just want to do less thinking and more doing. I would love to see him do that. I want to see him run the football more. That has been missing. He's been in the pocket far too much. But I do think in a game where they're a pretty sizable favorite, we go back to DJ Moore. We don't go to a Chase Claypool. We don't go to a Darnell Mooney. There just isn't enough confidence in this passing offense. I'll go to the most talented guy in a matchup where they will need to throw the ball. And, you could see some off-script stuff from Fields maybe benefit DJ Moore. So I will be playing DJ Moore, but otherwise I'm not going to take the chance here because the Chiefs have, although their fantasy points allowed is 14th, they've been decent against the pass overall, 5th in EPA. Sunday night stinker, Steelers, Raiders. The Steelers, I'm not sure how much I can trust Kenny Pickett regardless of the opponent. Like the Raiders have been pretty bad. Their pass rush hasn't been there even with, Max Crosby, 24th in fantasy points allowed, 27th in passing EPA. So it does look like an advantageous matchup. So for me, George Pickens being this number one option with Deontay Johnson on injured reserve, we didn't really see a Pat Freiermuth type of breakout game or an Allen Robinson type of breakout game in his absence. Pickens was that number one target for Pickett. I will play him in this game. If you have him, I do think this is a game where we could potentially see a get-right spot for Pickett against this Raiders defense because we started with the 49ers, then we go to the Browns. To me, those are like two top 5 defenses right now in the league, in my opinion. The Browns look incredibly good. So get-right spot here for this passing offense makes me feel pretty confident in playing Pickens because of the Raiders' struggles in the secondary. On the Raiders side of things, not too much to deliberate here. It's really just Devontae Adams. Don't know what the status will be of Jacoby Myers. If he's back, honestly, coming off of that week 1 performance, I could see him being a pretty serviceable guy for you. The Steelers have been okay against the pass. It'll really just come down to the protection, and that is where I'm a little bit skeptical for the Raiders in their pass pro, so that makes it a bit more of a tougher matchup, and I do think the Raiders will lean quite a bit on Josh Jacobs because the Steelers missing Cam Hayward. They haven't not looked good against the run in their first 2 games against the Niners and the Browns, so volume might not quite be there for a guy like Jacoby Myers, so I would just be confident in playing Devontae Adams in this matchup. All right, 2 games on Monday night, starting with Eagles-Bucks. Starting on the Eagles side, because this should be very short and sweet, the Bucs are a great run defense, not so good against the pass, 25th in fantasy points allowed to receivers. Both Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown are guys I'm definitely starting this week. I think A.J. Brown can bounce back. Every time you see those conversations or things blow up between a receiver and QB by the media and kind of going at it in the sidelines, I didn't really take much from it. I didn't even really think they were going at it per se from last week. I do think we'll see a bit more of a, hey, let's get the ball to this guy in a game where I think the Eagles won't have too much trouble. I know the Bucs have looked good so far. Don't know how much that continues against this Eagles defense. So that leads me to the other side of things. The Bucs are probably going to have to lean quite a bit on Baker Mayfield. I don't trust Rachaad White in the running game or this offensive line to be able to move bodies and run the football on the ground. So I do think they'll be dropping back quite a bit. So I feel pretty confident in both Chris Godwin and as we continue to see Mike Evans, he's like posting a target share that he hasn't posted in quite some time. So both him and Godwin are guys I do want to play because I do expect this team to have to move the ball through the air quite a bit. And it's pretty telling so far from the Eagles that is what teams have been doing. You look at the Vikings passing volume, look at the Patriots passing volume in those games. That's why they're 28th in fantasy points allowed to receivers. So both Godwin and Evans are quality starts for you this week. And finally, we close with Rams, Bengals. Let's start on the Rams side of things. The Bengals, I really trust their passing defense. I do think it's a really quality group. They're 7th in fantasy points allowed to receivers. I really trust Lou Anarumo and what he can scheme up. I did see some really interesting information. It came from Adam Chernoff of, I can't remember, Raz Picks. He was talking about how familiar the Rams are with those two opponents in division, the 49ers and the Seahawks, their first two games. Those two teams played a lot of zone, and it was very easy for this offense to kind of pick them apart. I will be interested to see what the Bengals do, because the Bengals are quality unit against the pass with Lou Anarumo, so it could give the Rams some trouble. So I like the Bengals to take away some of those deep parts of the field for Tutu Atwell, so I'm a little bit hesitant starting him in this particular matchup, but I do feel good about Puka Nacua. I mean, honestly, the target volume is way too high to ever consider sitting him. Like, it's readjust your expectations for this guy. He's basically in the tier of a Devontae Smith, of a A.J. Brown, because of that volume. That shouldn't change regardless of the matchup. So as long as Cooper Kupp is out, there's really no conversation to be had about whether or not you should start Puka Nacua. But Atwell is more that deep target guy that I do think the Bengals can kind of take away from this Rams offense. Bengals side of things, I don't have a lot of respect for the Rams defense. Their coverage grade is one of the worst in the league, 40.1. They're both middle of the road in EPA and fantasy points allowed to receivers, but a get right spot here for the Bengals at home. I'm definitely going to go with both Chase and T. Higgins. There's not a lot of situations where you would sit them. It'll just be dependent on, if we see Jake Browning potentially, then we'll talk about that on Friday as a potential discussion to have between whether or not you want to play both of these guys, one of these guys, or none of these guys. But that will have to be found out later on this week. Okay, every single matchup for week 3 of the fantasy football season to help you make your start-sit decisions at the wide receiver position. We covered running backs yesterday in my rankings, so be sure to go check that out on the channel as well. And of course, live from 4 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern on the Stunt, in a live room answering all of your questions. If you have any start-sit decisions you have to make, if you want to make any trades in your league and you want to hear from me, I would love to talk to you guys on there. We'd love to start building our community over on the Stunt. So the link to download the app for the Stunt will be both in the pinned comments and down below in the description. We'd love to have you guys join me there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.